Hello world of YouTube, and welcome to not necessarily a Saturday experiment, because I made a video on this last year in my conversation, but since I had a lot to talk about this year for my conversation in December, I figured I'd just make a video sort of comparing my two Spotify Wraps that I've talked about so far. Last year's versus this year's, talk about this year's, and why it may be the way that it is, and all that sort of stuff, because, you know, I do music stuff. Spotify Wrapped is kind of an important thing to people. And I think it's neat to see what Spotify decides to throw out there into the world that you have done this year musically. And I wrote down, because I didn't have the screenshot saved from last year, but I wrote down all the things I talked about in last year's conversation. And again, I'm going to kind of compare my artists, my genres, my songs, my new artists, all that sort of stuff. Starting with new artists, because that's what Spotify decided to focus on this year first. This year, I discovered 131 new artists as opposed to the 222 from last year. Stayed a little bit too much in my comfort zone, or I listened to so many artists last year that continued to release music this year that were a big thing. I don't know, they didn't say what artists I spun the most out of those new artists this year like they did last year. Last year, Solange was like my artist that I had started to get into, and I spun her music the most out of all the new artists I checked out. But this year, they didn't give me that kind of metric. But I think that that's cool. I wish that they would do that every year, because I kind of liked that aspect of it. I liked that they showed you who you listen to the most out of the new people that you listen to. As far as genres go, they didn't change up too much. A little refresher last year, my 5 through 1 were alt metal was number 5, which again made sense. I listened to a lot of Deftones and Faith No More and stuff like that. And then indie rock, which again also made sense. I listened to a lot of indie rock. I talk about a lot of indie rock. Pop also made sense. Regular rock, which again also made sense. And then hip hop was my number 1, which made a fuck ton of sense. And this year, my genres were alternative hip hop, alternative metal, pop, rock, and hip-hop. I still listen to, obviously, hip-hop has, I think, been my number 1 for a majority of my time with Spotify. I listen to a lot of hip-hop, shockingly. But I also listen to a lot of rock and pop, so that makes a lot of sense, even though I don't necessarily talk about pop all the time. I do spend a lot of time with the genre. And same with alt-metal, I guess, because that's still in my top 5. As far as alternative hip-hop, I think it's just because, again, I listen to a lot of hip-hop, so it's going to creep up on here in its own instances. But I'm not surprised that hip-hop was my number 1, because it's a genre that was very prolific this year. I spun a lot of hip-hop. I've talked about a lot of hip-hop, and good year for the genre, in my opinion. A lot of good stuff came out. As far as my song of the year, now, it's a little weird. Thinking about it, it's a little weird. But my song of the year last year, for those who don't remember, was Harmony Hall was my song of the year. Speedboat by Denzel Curry, A Better Place by Clipping. And then the last 2 were more Vampire Weekend, which so how Vampire Weekend wasn't my artist of the year, but Weezer was, but Hold You Now and Sunflower were also on this year-end wrap-up of my top 5 songs, is beyond me. This year, my song of the year was Night of the Long Knives by Everything Everything, and I have a few reasons as to why that would be. One, I put the song in a Spotify or in a Patreon playlist earlier this year, but also I've posted about it on my Instagram. I've been working on a Redacted for A Fever Dream. It's a record that I loved a lot upon release, but have been sort of like, there's something just a little off with this. And so I've been doing a Redacted on it, and I honestly really love the Redacted I've made of it. It'll be coming out next year. And it's one of my favorite Redacteds I've done in recent memory. I really love it. But it was my number 5, or my number 1 song of the year, partially because it was involved with both of those things. But as for my top 5 songs of the year, number 5 was Algorithm by Childish Gambino, a song that I still get a lot of rotation out of. It's, I think, the shining moment. Out of a few, it's the one that shines the brightest off of Childish Gambino's latest record. I think it's a great song, and it's one that I still get heavy rotation out of. Number 4, Thank You by Busta Rhymes and Q-Tip, a song that was on my Songs of the Decade, if I'm not mistaken, but was also on a Patreon playlist, and is a song that I've gotten a lot of reintegration into my rotation this year. Number 3 was I've Been Waiting by Big Crit. a song that came from an album that I did a Redacted on this year, and it's a Redacted I've been sitting on for a while, so I've been spinning that album a lot in general, but also that song in particular I do really enjoy for that record, and I feel like that makes sense why it's there. Number 2, Worlds to Run by Busdriver, Milo, and Anderson .Paak. You may be wondering, only one of the songs in your top 5 came out from this year, and it's because, and I'll talk about this in a minute, but Worlds to Run, Busdriver and Milo, one of my favorite songs of the decade. I love that collaboration of those two and Anderson .Paak's great hook work. One of my favorite hooks of his that he's on a feature of. Great beat, great song, just an incredible chill-ass hip-hop tune. And then my number 1 was Nine Long Knives, which I've already talked about. Now, why, you may be wondering, because if you look at my playlist as well, it's a lot of weird shit with some current stuff also in that rotation, and it's because I spent a lot of this year working on not only Redacteds, which will bleed into my Artists of the Year, but also I've been working on Patreon playlists a lot this year. And a lot of my Patreon playlists, while they have some new stuff in it, there's also a lot of old stuff in there. So my songs in general were just a lot of random shit. So my song playlist, which if you want to check out my top songs of the year playlist from Spotify, it's linked in the description. But I've been spending a lot of time with Spotify, tooling stuff around, and not only listening to new stuff, but working on a lot of stuff for the channel. My channel this year has been more than just the new music. It's been a lot of Redacteds, discographies, playlists with the Patreon, you know, a bunch of other stuff that's kind of going into the pot. So that's why it is the way it is, but that's why my top 5 is what it is, because, I mean, you look, it's something new, something for a Patreon playlist, something for Redacted. I think I put Worlds to Run in another different Patreon playlist, and it's also a song I just spin a lot in general. And then another song from not only a Patreon playlist, but a Redacted. So it's just, it's embodiment of my work and what I've been doing is what my Spotify playlist and what Spotify in general has been. They had this weird thing that was like a song, like if you were an influencer or you were like someone who got a lot of people or had like followers for something, they gave you a sort of attribute as like your power as a creator. But I wasn't put into that. I was put into the indie crowd scene because I got a different award for listening to Lost Powers, the Everything song, before it hit 50,000 streams. It said, you listened to Lost Powers before it hit that number. Next up, Finding the New Millennial Pink. I don't know what the hell that means, but apparently I listened to that song before it became bigger, which is cool. I love that record, so that's neat, I guess. They did a decades thing this year where it was like your top decade that you were listening stuff to. Mine was the 2000s. I was a little shocked because I do listen to a lot of stuff from the 90s and today and even the 80s. But they said the song that I listened to the most from that decade, which was really cool, was Hunting for Witches by Block Party. Again, because I put it in a Patreon playlist. I do really love that song, and in that particular playlist, when I was making it, I did kind of have that song on heavy rotation in general. I really like Hunting for Witches. I think it's a great Block Party song. But that was my, and that kind of makes sense at looking at some of the Patreon playlists. There's a lot of stuff from the 2000s in there, but I digress. My Artist of the Year, though. My Artist of the Year was Weezer. I listened to the most by them. And then my other top 5 was Vampire Weekend, Clipping, Nine Inch Nails, and Disaster Piece. My Artist of the Year, though, was not Everything, even though one of those songs was my Song of the Year. It was Aesop Rock, and I was in the top 1% of his listeners, which isn't surprising. I really like Aesop Rock. He was my Artist of the Decade last decade, if you remember from the conversation from last year. I'm a big fan of Aesop Rock. I've written songs about it now. He dropped a really dope record this year, so that makes a lot of sense. The song that I spent the most of theirs, though, was Daylight, which, again, one of my favorite Aesop Rock songs, but I spent almost 1,000 hours with Aesop Rock alone this year, which, again, makes a lot of fucking sense because I really love Aesop Rock. My other top artists, from 5 to 1, Clipping was number 5, which they were number 3 last year. Also, still, they dropped a dope record. I was still riding that last record pretty heavy into this year. I also did that podcast with Mark on Clipping, so clipping, as always, kind of in my regular rotation. 4, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and I would attribute that to the 2, if you check the podcast, you would know 2 Redacteds, because I did the one on By the Way, and I'm doing the one on the B-Sides U sessions, and I did that podcast with John, so I've had a lot of Chili Peppers on the brain throughout the year, so that makes a lot of sense. 3 was Big Crit, which again, I fucking love Big Crit, but I also did the Redacted that I said I'd been sitting on for a while. I think I've thrown him in a couple of playlists on Patreon, and again, I just really like Big Crit's music, so he's been on pretty heavy rotation for me personally. And then number 2 was Everything Everything, which again, they dropped a great record this year. I've been working on a Redacted for them for next year, and they were in a playlist, and they're just one of my favorite bands I discovered in the last decade. I'm a really big Everything Everything fan. I was dipping into their early work after listening to the new record. I have Get to Heaven on pretty regular rotation, and again, I've been working on that Redacted for a Fever Dream. So their whole discography, it was just kind of integrated into my life in an even heavier sense this year. And then again, Aesop Rock was my number 1 because, well, that's my dude. I love Aesop Rock. I think that he's a great rapper. I think he's a really cool dude. He seems like a really chill dude. I've been loving looking at his Instagram Q&As. He just seems like a really genuine guy. So yeah. But that's my Spotify Wrapped. And comparing it to last year, a lot of weird switch-ups. My work is still being showcased in heavy display. You can see where my focus is being pulled as far as what type of content I've been working my mind on a lot lately, in tandem with some stuff that just kind of creeps into my natural rotation as it is. But what did you think of this Spotify Wrapped video? Did you like it? Did you like comparing this year to last year? Would you want to see me do something like this again next year? Let me know. What were some of your Spotify Wrapped surprises, things you weren't surprised by? What was your Spotify Wrapped this year? Did you like what you were given? Did you like the news you were given? Let me know in those comments down below. If you did like this video, be sure to give it a like. If you want to see more of my music, gaming, and general nerdery content, be sure to subscribe. A special thanks to my patrons. If you want to join their ranks to get early access to content, exclusive content, or to help drive the community, it's linked in the description. I'm going to get out of here. I have been Viral Rack. You guys have good days, lives, situations, and I'll see you another day.